a critique of Daniel Schmachtenberger's Road to a New Civilization. We are living in a peculiar time. Before the modern times, countries, great empires, and entire civilizations rose and fell. Usually when they fell, they left others intact. They didn't bring them down as well. But now, the current technologically advancing global civilization has the capacity of destroying itself along with all of humanity. Game B is an attempt at figuring out how a different type of social system could look like that would allow for a stable existence of human civilization. I will present here one particular version of Game B as envisaged by Daniel Schmachtenberger. I will also present some of my criticisms and questions that it needs to answer. Because I will focus on one man's take on the problem, naturally, there will be many things that I say that may very well be addressed by others thinking about Game B. I am not presenting and critiquing Game B in its entirety, but one perspective on it. Other notable thinkers working under the Game B umbrella are Jim Rutt, Brett Weinstein, Jordan Greenhall, Forrest Landry, and Ben Goertzel. In my critique, I will draw heavily from existing criticisms of technology, in particular that of Ted Kaczynski. It's because Schmachtenberger and Kaczynski have a lot in common in their thinking about technology. They rely on game theory and complex systems theory on their analyses. Of course, they depart in major ways, especially when we're talking about solutions. I will also use some criticisms by other anti-technology philosophers, Jacques Ellul and John Zerzan. Who is Daniel Schmachtenberger? Daniel was home-taught, meaning he was free to pursue and explore his own interests without being confined in a rigid curriculum. He gained a lot of understanding of complex systems science that studies the processes of large wholes emerging out of local interactions between the elements, like ants doing very simple tasks that leads to the entire colony being able to intelligently respond and adapt to its environment. He is a systems thinker who analyzes and understands various domains of the world as such interacting systems. He is also a founder at Neurohacker Collective that aims to optimize human cognitive faculties. What is the problem with our civilization? Game B is an attempt at figuring out a solution to the problem with our current civilization. So, what is the problem with our civilization? The symptoms. In nature, we find that power is evenly distributed across the members of a given population. The fastest lion is only a bit better than the average lion, and there are no huge differences. And between the rivalrous groups, say lions and gazelles, there are symmetries of power. Gazelles are also very fast. Most healthy gazelles can escape a lion attack. Sometimes a gazelle runs away, sometimes a lion gets a kill. By being so close to each other in power level, they can live alongside each other, constantly exerting pressure for the other to get a bit better. The lions get better, but only a little, and only as much as gazelles get better. They keep each other in check. A natural predator can only kill as much prey as he can eat, and he can't eat much at once. A predator is not super powerful compared to the prey, but we are. We can catch so many fish at once that we have to count them in tons. We no longer are mere predators. This is because of our use of constantly improving tools and machines. We've broken the symmetry of power. That means that we're unable to maintain stability in the environments we live in. With scarce resources and in a rivalrous game theoretic setting, there are strong incentives to not only withhold information about the world, but there are also incentives to misinform the other groups about the world. A system of selective pressures creates such perverse incentives to misinform, lie, generally to engage in information warfare to benefit oneself or one's group at the expense of the larger community. If someone chooses not to play by those bad rules, he loses to the ones who do. The ethical ones are simply being replaced by the less ethical. So it's better for you not to be so virtuous as to remove yourself from the game. The unethical system convinces the ethical people to compromise on their ethics to become the tool for the system. The prognosis. We have identified the symptoms that ail the modern world. What is the prognosis for the patient, for humanity? The symptoms of the disintegration of our civilization are intrinsically linked to technology. We constantly make better technology and we use this technology to make even better technology. With each decade we observe some technological breakthroughs, and normally that's okay. We want innovations, new medical procedures, more computational power, novel forms of communication, more efficient powerhouses. But alongside all that clearly beneficial tech, we have developments that pose grave danger to the future of entire human civilization. We not only have a few national superpowers armed with nuclear weapons, but we're witnessing the emergence of new kinds of technology. We're talking about exponential technology, the technology that we use to make better forms of technology, that are also easier to use by smaller groups. That would include genetic engineering with the possibility of creating deadly viruses, artificial intelligence aimed at optimizing for a mundane task but with unforeseen but disastrous consequences, and nanotechnology that could allow creating miniature weapons. All this points to a bleak picture of the future, where we destroy the environment, making most of the planet unsuitable for us to live on. In the darkest of scenarios, we eradicate ourselves altogether, or even most complex life on the planet. The root cause. Why don't we use technology for the benefit of all, and instead we use it to extract natural resources and ruin the environment? Why do we make this technology and why do we use it in such destructive ways? It's because when one group starts to use technology to extract some natural resources while polluting the environment, this group gets a major advantage over its competitors. So they now have to do the same or else they will be outcompeted. And after a while, we have a situation where no one can stop, because if they stop, the others will continue to abuse the environment and a new group will take their place. So it creates a race to the bottom, where a short-term gain is beneficial for every such group, but in the long term, their actions lead to disastrous consequences for everyone. As long as we're having separate interests, there are incentives to game the game, whatever it is. Economy is a system that predisposes people to do certain things. It creates extrinsic incentives or motivations. This is done through currency. Everything can be seen as exchangeable and usable. The only things we see and focus on are the things we can convert into currency. But economy makes it impossible to value or optimize for many non-exchangeable goods, such as songbirds, nature, personal enjoyment. Currency as a metric doesn't capture many otherwise valuable goods, goods that are shared by all of us. When this system acquires exponential technology, it becomes a self-terminating one. Because it can't leave the natural resources alone. They have to be converted into things measurable by currency. The solution. Now that we know the state of our global civilization, the root cause and the prediction based on the current trajectory, we can ask, what can we do about it? Daniel attempts at giving a fragmentary answer. The answer consists of two general parts. One part is to give constraints that any workable plan has to meet. The other is to provide some ideas that can fit the overall plan. When I'm saying that this is a fragmentary answer, I don't mean it in a derogatory way. We simply don't know enough to provide a full plan with a step-by-step process, and Daniel is perfectly aware of that. The constraints on any potential plan. When it comes to the parameters that any viable program must work under, we immediately see that Schmachtenberger focuses almost exclusively on people and social relations rather than technology itself. This is in stark contrast with major philosophers of technology such as John Zerzan, Ted Kaczynski, or Jacques Ellul. There are many problems that can lead us to the collapse of civilization. Various existential threats, AI, climate change, etc., are only instances of an underlying category of problems. There is something fundamental that generates these problems or that creates conditions for such threats to arise. So we must deal with these generator functions rather than specific instances. Technologically advanced rivalrous groups that aim to seek benefits for themselves at the expense of the commons are such generator functions of existential threats. And because we can't stop technology, we have to transform society from rivalrous to cooperative. So, a workable plan has to solve not the mere manifestations of the problem, but those fundamental principles that give rise to various problems. The drive for competition is based on us having separate interests. I can get ahead by winning over you. Whenever there are possibilities to succeed by screwing others, it will keep happening. This has to be changed so that the well-being of every person is tied to the well-being of others. And the only way to prosper is by helping others prosper. Participating in the system has to be more advantageous than going against it. Ideas for the future. Daniel notices that the way we're doing social science is essentially broken because we are studying societies that get ahead of others by destroying them through competition. But studying rivalrous social systems can only lead us to conclusions that that's how societies inherently operate. But it doesn't mean that other social systems are impossible, because we don't have a representative sample of societies. So we conclude that various destructive features are intrinsic to human nature, but in fact they result from cultural conditioning. We could have a social environment where people wouldn't be conditioned for selfishness, but for cooperation for the long-term common good. Some of such systems are smaller tribes, where everybody knows, depends on, and cares for everybody else. In such small communities, people can support each other and hold each other accountable. Sustainable, advanced civilization would have to scale this principle so that everybody cares for everybody else. It doesn't seem possible to sustain a large global population of people who would live a high quality of life that people in the affluent countries enjoy. What's necessary is depopulation. We're already seeing a rapid lowering of birth rates in advanced societies. At the time of writing, we have approximately 90 to 130 countries that are below replacement rate. What this suggests is that populations of many countries will go down for some time and then they will most likely stabilize. Various factors influence fertility rate, such as calories per day, health of the children and child mortality rate, income and wealth, education, especially for women, access to contraception, abortion, family planning, integration of women into the labor force, age at first marriage for women. With time, we can expect more countries to get industrialized, educated, and wealthy. We can expect their populations to also start going down up to a stable size. This would make it possible for everyone to enjoy a high quality of life. With a smaller world population, it would be possible for everybody to get access to education and stuff, but we can't just throw stuff away as it wastes resources. The idea is to bind produced things in a closed-loop economy. By that we mean that produced things are given to people, and when they break or are replaced or no longer used, then they are scrapped and completely recycled into raw materials, so that new things will be made from them. And that should be possible with the ever-advancing green energy. Everyone would get access to things as they would get a service to use these things and have them fixed and replaced. The critique. The analysis of the problems and the causes of those problems of modern civilization seem very accurate, complex, and nuanced, but how well do they fare? Education. Daniel designs a social system where the population would be educated in the science of government and other domains that would allow people to understand interrelated problems in the world and come up with good proposals for solutions. How plausible is such an educational system? How smart do we have to be to understand how the government works and be able to meaningfully participate? What about personal interests and inclinations? Some people are interested in arts, some in engineering, some in sports, some in still other things. Are we all able to appreciate the science of government enough to want to track the development of government for our entire lives? These are only some of the questions that need answering just to say whether jump-starting the process of transitioning to the new civilization is possible. When do people defect? Daniel says that as long as defecting from the system is more advantageous than participating fairly, it will keep happening, and some groups will go against the common good for their own benefit. The implication being that if defecting is not more advantageous, then it will not happen. But this conclusion doesn't follow. It could be the case where we all very rational beings, but we aren't. Sometimes we decide to do something on incomplete information because of errors of reasoning or when we're swayed by strong emotions or by mistakes. Groups can still defect from the system even when it isn't ultimately beneficial for them for such reasons. And when these groups have access to exponential technology such as AI, biotechnology, nanotechnology, we get back to the starting point where we are at great risk of those technologies being catastrophically misused. Unpredictability of complex dynamical social systems. Ted Kaczynski introduced a concept of self-propagating systems based on our knowledge of game theory and complex systems. A self-propagating system is any system that can maintain itself and preserve itself, such as an organism, an institution, a corporation. It seems that in any institution, a self-propagating system can arise that has goals not aligned with the goals of the containing system. A collection of such systems functions in similar ways to how species interact through evolution. These self-propagating systems grow larger and larger. The ones that do not grow are outcompeted by the ones that do. Such a system looks for and exploits every opportunity to gain more power. If it doesn't, it's being replaced by those that do. Focusing on short-term gains, even at the cost of long-term adverse effects, gives the system major advantages over the competition. This is enough to grow larger than those other ones. These points lead us to a conclusion that self-propagating systems will grow larger and larger and will be more and more ferocious with their use of natural resources, ignoring long-term consequences. Ultimately, the result will be the total collapse of the world, making it unsuitable for complex life. Daniel Schmachtenberger disagrees that this is inevitable. According to him, it is possible to design a social system where there would be no incentives for short-term gains, or that short-term gains would not be greater than focusing on long-term stability and ecology. But can this be actually true? Because socio-economical global civilization is a complex system of complex systems, it's more plausible to think that there will always be various loopholes and backdoors we couldn't account for, such that they can and will be exploited by greedy self-propagating systems for gaining power at the cost of the long-term health of the entire humanity. It's difficult to believe that a system without those problems is possible. If it is, I think we would need a much stronger, formalized argument to show that this is indeed possible. This is connected with another point Kaczynski makes. Complex systems, such as a society, climate, ecosystem, are systems of interconnected elements. They behave in a non-linear fashion, that is, an increase in some parameter, for example temperature, may lead to disproportionately huge results. The characteristics of a complex system tell us very little that could help us in guessing what the system will do. We often observe novel behaviors on the scale of the entire systems, so-called emergent behaviors. Many complex systems function in chaotic ways. This means that their behavior is unpredictable, even in principle. Just a tiny difference in the model of such a system will lead to completely different results and conclusions. The farther we go into the future with our predictions, the worse they are. If we can't predict how the society will evolve, how can Schmachtenberger claim we can control its evolution? And how can we say that certain changes in the society will lead to positive effects in the long run? The problem of unpredictability comes from yet another angle. For the sake of the argument, let's assume that everybody in the Game B society operates according to the rules. Everyone aims to maximize well-being for everybody else. Still, we can't predict the ultimate consequences of our technological innovations. Maybe in the future we will want to combat disease using gene drives, and a cure will mix with some virus and will spread rapidly across the entire population. Maybe we will want to modify crops to fare well in the hotter climate, but the genes will jump to the weeds that will be extremely difficult to stop, leading to a famine. We can't predict all accidents. That's why they happen. That's why they will continue to happen, even in the best of imaginable societies. And when this society has access to exponential technology, accidents can be terminal. We're not good at risk assessment of second and third order effects over the long term. These effects are indirect effects from the first order effects. So it's hard for us to know whether a technology will be safe and beneficial over the long run. Our good intentions are not enough. We're simply not capable of predicting what the noxious effects of an invention will come across decades into the future. Daniel wants to preserve technological advancements, but how is it possible when we're simply blind to its future impact on us and on the environment? Competition and human nature. Access to things and institutions is not enough. People are not equal in terms of ability. Some people necessarily will gain more status and recognition by virtue of them being better at certain things. Lots of people will contribute nothing that will be highly valued. Won't it be a problem for those who would want to be seen in such a light? If it will be a problem, which is more than likely, then how will they react? Will they stand by, or will they do what we always do, pillage and conquer? Competition seems to be ingrained into our minds. We compete for status, power, resources, mates, and even for our lives. We explain this phenomenon by referring to evolutionary pressures that molded our minds in such a way. Just as we are afraid of snakes or crave salty and fatty foods, we have strong tendencies for competition. We contest to show our value and to secure access to resources and mates. That's why we have some complex emotions and associated concepts for justice and fairness, jealousy, sense of being at a certain level on the social hierarchy, positive emotions involved in the recognition of winning, and negative emotions involved in defeat. These emotions lead to various problems, and they may even drive our use of dangerous technology. Daniel argues that we can, in fact, overcome these impulses. He says that the idea that we're inherently competitive is mistaken because it's based on looking at competitive cultures and the other cultures are now long gone. When we look at other primates, we very often see hierarchies and competition. The most famous example is our closest relative, chimpanzees, who control their territory and violently genocide other bands out of existence. On the other side of the spectrum are bonobo, also called pygmy chimpanzees, who seem to be much more egalitarian and non-violent. Which are we? And can our nature be changed and controlled? We're more sexually dimorphic than bonobo, which tells us that most likely our species is in fact one where males physically compete between each other while females may compete between each other in other ways. This is a pattern that's consistent across a variety of species. If the drive for competition is as deeply rooted in our biological endowment as seeking mates, securing shelter, making tools, then it may be extremely difficult to contain it and maintain long-term stability. So far, Daniel hasn't made a convincing argument that this is even possible, an argument that would take into account biology, anthropology, and our psychology. Daniel said that for the competition to be present, there has to be a single metric on which to measure success or position. But in the new society, there wouldn't be a single metric, as anyone could do their own thing and pursue achievements there. But we already live in such a world with a multitude of metrics or hierarchies. In each sport you have a different metric. In each branch of science you have a different hierarchy of scholars. Each branch of the industry competes mostly within the branch. Photographers compete with other photographers, drummers compete with other drummers. We have loads of disciplines with their own metrics and hierarchies. Competition is going on strong and is fierce in any of them. So it's plausible that in the new society people would also like to compete with the peers that are in the same general domain or are doing something at least similar. So far, I haven't seen a counter-argument to that. A related point to that of our drive for competition and status is Daniel's comment on the plasticity of our nature. Our species has been selected for memetics. Essential to human nature is the depth of nurture capacities. We are extremely adaptive beings. We learn to adapt to all our environments. We learn the language, the tools, how to operate efficiently in an environment. Because of our extended neoteny, we have unparalleled space for teaching our young. That's why human nature can be conditioned for the extremes, from the Jains who don't hurt insects to child soldiers. Indeed, there are plenty of examples where people conform to and are shaped by the circumstances. Lots of Germans during World War II worked in concentration camps. Some Buddhist monks devoted their entire lives to meditation and scholarly work, supposedly being able to extend kindness to all living creatures. Yet, These examples don't show us those people who didn't go along with the rest. How many Germans didn't take part or run away? How many people failed at becoming monks? The problem is, we don't know whether it's possible to nurture all people so that they fit well into a given system, and we don't know whether this will be stable for many generations. As Steven Pinker argued in his book The Blank Slate, The Modern Denial of Human Nature, we're endowed with many tendencies, predilections, and traits. We're not blank slates that can be simply painted on by even the best social system. Daniel needs to make a strong argument that it is possible to have a teaching system that would work for the vast majority of people and would be stable. And if it wouldn't work for all people, then we need to know what to do with the rest. Cherry-picked examples are not replacements for arguments. Since the early days of psychology, we had ideas about traits and drives that pertain to competitiveness, going back to Freud's libido and Jung's archetypes. But going even further back to ancient traditions, we see people talking about sinful nature of people, or about yin and yang, or about spirits that make us do bad things. These are all very crude ways of understanding ourselves, but they were good enough in that they pointed toward the complex and not very pretty nature of Homo sapiens. What every culture recognized is that people have the capacity to do great harm, to destroy, in short, to do evil. If you want to go against this, well, all the power to you. But you need to make a very good case that the plasticity of human nature is more than just wishful thinking or a look at human nature through pink glasses. We all know about group-related biases. We tend to favor the group we're in, and we tend to be more negative toward those who are not in our group. We might try to think of these biases only as due to us living in particular types of societies, but there is a second possibility. These tendencies might have evolved because they helped our ancestors survive. Our close relatives, chimpanzees, live in small groups. Males do border patrols of their territory in small bands. When they catch someone from another group, they brutally kill them, no mercy. Our close extinct relative, Neanderthal, also aggressed on other groups. We have evidence of Neanderthals killing children and eating out their brains using a rock. It's not difficult to believe that such violent tendencies are a part of our strongly competitive nature. What this points to is the idea of evolutionary adaptations for war. This trend in evolutionary psychology is getting more and more traction since at least late 1980s. If we indeed have adaptations and tendencies for intergroup conflict and even warfare, then it might be very difficult designing a social system that would not trip the evolutionary wire that would fire off a large-scale aggression. The only point I'm trying to make here is that we cannot simply brush this off. It has to be explicitly taken into account in the design of the society, if it is to stand any chance. Interaction with other societies. Daniel imagines that one group of people will jumpstart a successful Game B society, which will grow and attract others to join. He thinks that because this new society will give away their solutions for free to everybody else, they would be safe. No one would be incentivized to attack them, the argument goes. But this is based on a premise that is false. The argument is based on the premise that power struggles, fights, and wars are driven by rational thought. Yes, it would be rational not to attack the new society to continue to get new innovations from them. But this is not how humans work. Human societies attack others because they're scared, they don't want to lose their position, they want to show others they're not to be messed with, and for a myriad of other irrational reasons. Just because it's in everybody's interest not to attack the new societies, it doesn't guarantee that it will not happen. Even today, countries don't adopt better solutions from other countries. The most known example is USA not even having national healthcare and paid leave vacation. Another is North Korea, who would fare much better if it adopted the model of South Korea. How can we expect that in the future worse countries would adopt the way of the better countries? We can expect a growing number of Game B societies, but most of the world will go on with their business as usual. In the worst case, Game B societies will be crushed by the more powerful ones. Various. The new system will have many inefficiencies. We make errors, machines break, pipes burst, materials spill over and get to underground rivers. The closed loop will have leaks. The destruction of the environment will continue. The waste and degradation will be slower, of course, but will stay with us even in the new social order. In a system where everyone would be provided with food and access to things, even if most people would likely continue to work for satisfaction and progress, there would be many free riders. They would only consume and use the things, but not contribute much, if at all. This could generate animosities and conflicts between the free riders and the producers. It's just one example when groups of people would defect from the system, even though it would lead to them being worse off. This can happen for a variety of reasons: biological, medical, psychological. But it can happen even in a society with a stellar education system. So how would the defectors be dealt with by the society? Will the society be resilient to the presence of the mistaken defectors? Everyone would get access to things as they would get a service to use these things and have them fixed and replaced. That means that people wouldn't own them. Will people be willing to relinquish private property? Will people be willing to abandon their sentimental and unique items? There are plenty of things that just cannot be mass-produced, such as works of art or things that were used by some important person. These cannot be copied, but they are highly valued. We want such things today, we will want them in the future. How can a closed-loop production economic system accommodate this? There are plenty of hierarchies in our world. Lots of those hierarchies are constructed by amassing power and access to resources. It's very likely that we do it to signal our value to potential mates. The more resources a person has, the more chances will their offspring have for a biologically successful life. The more resources a person has, the more likely they have valuable genes. But in the Game B world order, there is no place for such hierarchies, no place for signaling genetic value by conspicuous consumption. This means that romantic and sexual relationships will also be affected. So how would relationships look like in the new societies? Will the alternative model be accepted by a sufficiently large number of people? If not, what then? Anti-tech philosophy. Daniel takes it as a given that we cannot stop technological progress. That's why we have to change our social dynamics. Anti-tech philosophers would disagree. They would say that not only we can stop technology, but we should do it at all costs. This is especially clear in Kaczynski's Anti-Tech Revolution, Why and How. Even the title tells you a lot. Kaczynski lays out his understanding of technology and argues that we need a radical movement with a singular goal: to destroy global industrial civilization, as that's the only way to save complex life on Earth. He presses this point strongly and outlines how it could be done. It's not clear why Schmachtenberger thinks this is impossible. He may have some good reasons, and it would be great to hear them, but for now, this sentiment seems unjustified. Some anti-tech philosophers, including Kaczynski, Zerzan, and Ellul, believe that technology has very negative impact on us. And this is intrinsic to technology, as it mechanizes everything, converting us to rule-following parts, who can't genuinely engage with the world and with our lives. Schmachtenberger would do well to respond to such critiques of technology to make his case deeper and stronger, and we would see how tight his case is. Countering these anti-tech positions is necessary to fend off criticisms of his ideas about the technological future of humanity. Some anti-tech thinkers believe that the technology itself is the source of existential risks and that it should be abandoned. Ted Kaczynski even postulated a plan to establish an anti-tech movement whose only goal would be to damage the industrial civilization so that it would be unrecoverable. According to him, this is the only chance of preserving the continuation of life on Earth. We may now ask Daniel Schmachtenberger, why is it better to devote our resources to the dangerous plan at rearranging our entire society rather than go with the recommendations of anti-tech philosophers? Ethics. Daniel's work on starting the trend towards a new type of society seems to be based on a naive ethics. By that I don't mean that it's entirely nonsensical. What I mean is that the ethics that underlies his enterprise can be characterized by two statements. First, his ethics seems to be fairly reasonable and possibly acceptable for most people, without many controversial positions. And second, his ethics wasn't sufficiently explored or argued for. And this characteristic is shared even by many anti-tech philosophers, climate activists, environmentalists, etc. This is clearly seen when Daniel says that because technology poses an existential risk, we have to do something about. We have to solve the problem. On the face of it, it looks like an uncontroversial statement. But it's also somewhat naive, because we never hear Daniel say, why should we solve this problem? If technology indeed poses a grave risk, and someday it'll lead to the disappearance of our species, what then? Who will cry after us? Will the trees be negatively affected by that? Will the bees be worse off? Will the animals in the wild miss us? No. There will not be a single individual feeling a loss after Homo sapiens is gone. So why would our extinction be bad? For whom it would be bad? Antinatalist philosophers make a case that leads us to a conclusion that the disappearance of humanity wouldn't be bad after all. Some even say it would be a good thing. The fundamental philosophical question that all Game B thinkers, including Daniel Schmachtenberger, but also anti-tech philosophers, environmentalists and climate activists have to engage with and provide an answer to is this. Why prolong the existence of Homo sapiens? Wouldn't it be just fine if we simply went extinct just a bit sooner rather than later? Conclusion. Daniel Schmachtenberger identified a fundamental problem with our civilization. Rivalrous groups armed with exponentially progressing technology strive to benefit themselves at the expense of others, which should lead to the collapse of civilization. The solution? Reshape the social reality to bind well-being of people so that the success of anyone benefits everyone. There are numerous problems with this version of Game B. People defect from systems for irrational reasons, even when playing with the rules would benefit them. The progress of technology and society cannot be predicted, and hence it cannot be controlled. We seem to have a natural instinct for competition. We see it everywhere, in politics, in sports, in arts, in cuisine. We have no reason to believe that it's possible to get rid of it to form a new type of a society. Various thinkers point to technology itself as the source of the problems, not just how we use it. And finally, the apocalyptic predictions are such only because of unstated assumption that it would somehow be bad for Homo sapiens to go extinct. An assumption that, upon closer inspection is naive and unjustified.